The first encounter. It was a calm, quiet day in the vastness of space. The spaceship Odyssey was on its usual mission, exploring a distant region of the galaxy. The crew had been out there for months, discovering new planets and strange phenomena, but nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to find. It all began when they noticed something unusual on their radar. A large, unknown object was drifting near the edge of a nearby asteroid belt. It didn't match any of the signatures they had seen before. The crew stared at the screen in disbelief. "Captain, you need to see this," said Lieutenant James, the officer in charge of the radar. His voice was calm, but his hands were trembling as he pointed to the screen. Captain Rachel Adams walked over and peered at the readout. The object was enormous, far bigger than anything they had ever encountered. It was shaped like a ship, but it wasn't made of the usual materials they were used to. Its surface was smooth and reflective, glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. "What is it?" Rachel muttered under her breath, her eyes narrowing. The silence in the control room was deafening. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had no idea what they were looking at, but they knew one thing for sure. This was no ordinary object. Something inside Rachel told her this would be different from anything they had faced before. "Should we investigate?" asked Commander Alice, the second in command. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed a hint of nervousness. The crew had encountered dangerous situations before, but this felt different. They all knew the risks of exploring the unknown, but this object felt wrong. Rachel thought for a moment. It was a risk, but they couldn't ignore it. They had to know what it was. After all, this was the whole purpose of their mission: discovery. "Prepare to board," Captain Adams ordered. "Prepare the shuttle. We're going in." The crew quickly got to work. As they approached the object, it became clear that it wasn't just a regular ship. The surface was unlike anything they had seen before. Too smooth, too perfect. No markings, no seams, no indication of what kind of ship it might be. It was as if it had been carved out of a single piece of material. The eerie blue light seemed to pulse as the ship got closer, filling the crew with a growing sense of unease. "Captain, I'm not sure this is a good idea," Lieutenant James said, his voice trembling. "There's something off about this thing. It doesn't feel right." Rachel turned to him. "We don't have a choice, James. We need to find out what this is. Prepare for entry." The shuttle slowly approached the object, and with each passing moment, the tension inside the ship grew thicker. The crew could feel their hearts racing as the object loomed ever closer, almost like a shadow swallowing them up. No one spoke. They were all too focused on the unknown ahead of them. The shuttle docked with the strange vessel, and the crew disembarked, weapons in hand, ready for whatever might come next. The air inside the vessel was still, unnervingly quiet. There was no sound except for the soft echo of their footsteps. "I don't like this," Alice whispered. Her hand gripped her weapon tightly, eyes darting around the eerie silence. "Where is everyone? Where are the signs of life?" No one answered. They were all thinking the same thing. Was this ship abandoned? Or was there something worse waiting for them inside? They moved cautiously through the corridors, each step echoing off the cold, metallic walls. The design of the ship was strange, its architecture unlike anything they had seen before. It seemed both alien and somehow ancient. The walls were smooth, seamless, with faint lines running across them that seemed to pulse with the same eerie blue light. The deeper they went, the more uncomfortable they felt. It was as if they were being watched, though there was nothing in sight. "Captain, look," James said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. He pointed to the end of the hall, where a figure stood in the shadows. It was tall, much taller than any human, with long, flowing limbs and a shape that seemed both graceful and terrifying at the same time. The figure was draped in a shroud of darkness, its features obscured by the shadows. For a moment, no one moved. The crew stood frozen, unsure of what to do. They had expected to find signs of life, but nothing like this. The figure's presence was overwhelming, its eyes glowing faintly from within the darkness. Then the figure moved. Slowly, it stepped into the light. As it did, the crew saw her fully for the first time. She was unlike anything they had ever imagined. Her skin was a deep shade of black, smooth and almost metallic, and her eyes glowed a soft blue, just like the ship. Her face was beautiful, almost ethereal, but there was something otherworldly about her. She didn't look like a monster, but the crew felt an instinctive fear course through them. The fear of the unknown. "Stay back," Rachel ordered, raising her weapon. "We don't know what you are." The alien didn't move. She stood still, her glowing eyes locked on Rachel's, as if studying her. The tension in the air was unbearable. The crew held their breath, waiting for the alien to make a move. But instead of attacking, the alien simply tilted her head, as if confused by their reaction. Rachel's mind raced. Could it be? Could this alien really be as dangerous as they thought? Or was there something more to her, something they weren't seeing? The crew was paralyzed by fear, each member unsure of what to do next. Then John, the youngest officer on the crew, stepped forward. He was different from the others. While the rest were frozen in place, John felt an overwhelming urge to understand the alien. Something about her calm presence made him question everything he knew. Without thinking, he reached out. The silence was deafening. Would his courage lead to disaster, or was this the key to unraveling the mystery of the monstrous alien in front of them? The tension was unbearable as they waited for what would happen next. The fear spreads. The crew was silent as they stood in the shadow of the alien figure. John's heart raced, but his mind was clear. He could feel it, an odd pull toward the creature, something deeper than just curiosity. The others, however, were not as calm. Tension thickened the air like a heavy fog. "John, step back," Lieutenant James hissed, his voice laced with fear. His hand tightened around his weapon. "We don't know what she wants." John didn't take his eyes off the alien. Her glowing blue eyes met his, and for a moment there was no fear, just understanding. But that moment was brief. He could feel the others, behind him, beginning to panic. The quiet murmur of their whispers grew louder, filled with uncertainty. "Why is she just standing there?" Alice, the commander, asked, her voice trembling. "This isn't normal. She's not making any movements. What if she's waiting for us to make the first move?" The crew's fear began to spread like wildfire. The air felt thick, suffocating, as the crew debated what to do next. Was this a trap? Was the alien waiting for them to make a mistake? Captain Adams's face was grim as she looked at the figure. She didn't trust it. She couldn't. The unknown was terrifying, and no amount of logic could dispel the fear gnawing at her insides. "Stay alert," she ordered, her voice low but firm. "We're not taking any chances." John, however, felt a strange surge of determination. He understood the fear. He felt it too. But it wasn't the fear of the alien itself. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear of what they didn't understand. And in that moment, he realized something that no one else had yet. Their fear wasn't because she was a monster. Their fear was because she was different. He stepped forward, slowly, cautiously. "I'm going to talk to her," he said, his voice unwavering. "Are you out of your mind?" James snapped, grabbing John's arm. "Don't do it. She could rip you apart in an instant." But John shrugged off James's grip. "We don't know that. We don't know anything yet." The crew watched in disbelief as John moved closer to the alien, every step he took filled with the tension of the moment. Captain Adams gave him one last warning. "John, I can't let you do this. Come back." But John didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Every instinct in him told him that if he didn't try now, they might never get another chance to understand her. The crew's fear was their barrier. The alien was just a person, trapped in a world of misunderstanding. He needed to see that. The alien didn't react, not even when John was within arm's reach. She just stood there, her gaze fixed on him. Her eyes, glowing softly in the dim light, held no malice, no aggression, just stillness. John took a deep breath and reached out with his hand. The air seemed to hold its breath with him. Every crew member watched in horror, unable to look away. He wasn't afraid, but they were. The crew was terrified that the alien might strike at any moment. It was as if the silence itself had become an unseen force, pushing everyone back, waiting for the inevitable. John's hand hovered just an inch away from her skin. The tension in the room built to a peak, and then nothing happened. The alien didn't move. She didn't strike. In fact, she seemed almost peaceful. The crew stared, dumbfounded, as John stood there, hand extended. It was as though the alien was waiting for him to make the next move, not to harm him, but to connect. John. Captain Adams's voice cracked as she stepped forward, her hand still holding her weapon, though it lowered slightly. What's happening? John turned to face her, his expression filled with a strange sense of wonder. She's not going to hurt us. I don't know how, but I feel it. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Could they really believe that? Could they risk it? The alien's gaze shifted to the captain, then back to John. There was something in her eyes, something human. But no one spoke. No one moved. The moment stretched on, hanging in the air like an unanswered question. As the seconds passed, a slow realization began to creep over the crew. They had been so focused on the idea of an alien threat that they had forgotten one simple thing. The unknown was not always dangerous, and sometimes all it took was one person to see beyond the fear, to make the first move. And John, against all odds, had made it. The moment of contact. The tension in the air was so thick that it seemed as if the ship itself was holding its breath. John stood still, his hand still hovering just inches from the alien. The crew behind him shifted nervously, unsure of what to do next. Captain Adams clenched her fists, unsure if she should stop him or let him continue. John felt an unexplainable calm wash over him as his fingers lightly brushed against the alien's skin. The contact was electric, sending a strange, tingling sensation through his entire body. For a brief moment, he thought he might be dreaming, or worse, that this was some kind of trap. But the alien didn't react with violence or aggression. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The alien's eyes, those glowing blue eyes, softened. The fierce, unblinking stare that had made the crew uneasy seemed to shift, becoming something different. Curious, almost tender. It was a moment of connection, fleeting yet profound. John's heart raced, but he didn't pull away. The alien, for the first time since their encounter, seemed to relax. Her glowing eyes blinked slowly, as if processing something deep inside her mind. John stood there, unsure of what this moment meant, but knowing one thing for certain: this was not what they had expected. The crew stood frozen, watching the strange interaction unfold before them. Lieutenant James, his eyes wide in disbelief, whispered, What's happening? Is she trying to communicate?" The air seemed to hum with anticipation. For the first time since they had boarded this alien ship, there was a possibility of peace, of understanding. And yet, that possibility felt as fragile as glass. One wrong move, one sudden action, and it could shatter. "Captain," John said quietly, not taking his eyes off the alien. She's not dangerous. She just wants to make contact." Captain Adams' expression was a mix of disbelief and caution. She glanced at the crew behind her, who were all watching John and the alien with growing concern. "We can't be sure," she said, her voice low but firm. "Stay cautious, John." But John felt something in that moment, a deep, unshakable feeling that the alien meant no harm. He took another step forward, lowering his hand to her arm. The alien didn't flinch. Instead, she seemed to accept his touch, her skin reacting softly under his hand, almost as though it was alive, warm to the touch, despite her otherwise cold appearance. As John touched her, a strange pulse of energy passed through him. It wasn't painful, but it was enough to make him take a step back, shaking off the sensation. His heart raced faster now, his mind racing to process what had just happened. The alien tilted her head slightly, her gaze never leaving him. Then, to the crew's astonishment, she made a sound, low, soft, and musical. It wasn't a language they understood, but there was something unmistakably emotional in her tone. It wasn't threatening, nor was it mechanical like a robot. It was the sound of a living being reaching out, trying to make a connection, much like a person might try to communicate without words. The crew collectively exhaled, but their fear was far from gone. They stood at the edge of something they couldn't fully comprehend, and though they were drawn to the alien's humanity, they knew that there was still so much they didn't understand. John took another cautious step back. "I think she's trying to tell us something. She's not a monster, Captain. She's just like us, in a way." Captain Adams looked at him, her expression serious. She could see the sincerity in John's eyes, but she also knew the danger of jumping to conclusions in a situation like this. "We don't know that yet, John. We need more information before we can trust her. Stay on guard." John nodded, but his belief in the alien's peaceful intentions didn't waver. He looked back at her, meeting her gaze. For a moment, it felt like the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Then something incredible happened. The alien's hand, delicate and long, slowly moved towards him. Her fingers brushed against his skin, and in that instant, John felt a wave of emotions flood through him. Fear, sorrow, longing, and hope. It was as if her touch was a silent plea, a request for understanding. He blinked, trying to process what had just happened. Was this some form of communication? Was she reaching out, not just physically but emotionally? It was impossible to say, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't afraid anymore. Not of her. But what about the rest of the crew? As the alien's hand lingered near John's, the air felt charged with anticipation. The crew watched in stunned silence, the future of this encounter hanging in the balance. Would they take the leap toward understanding, or would fear continue to rule their actions? The moment of contact had changed everything. The truth revealed. The silence in the room was almost suffocating as the crew continued to stare, unsure of what they were witnessing. John stood just a few feet away from the alien, her delicate hand still hovering near his, as if inviting him into a deeper connection. The tension was palpable, the crew frozen in place as they tried to understand what had just happened. The alien had shown no signs of aggression, yet everything about her was different. She wasn't a monster, but something still felt off. Captain Adams, her brow furrowed in deep thought, couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to this than just an alien trying to communicate. She glanced at her crew, then back at John, who was still in what appeared to be an almost trance-like state. "John," she said, her voice steady but commanding. "What is she trying to tell us? What does she want?" John blinked, breaking the strange connection he had felt. He looked back at the captain, his expression a mix of awe and uncertainty. "I don't know, Captain, but I think she's trying to show us something." The alien didn't move, but her eyes never left John. There was a kind of quiet sadness in them, an emotion John couldn't place but felt deeply within himself. He stepped closer, sensing that whatever they were experiencing in this moment would determine everything that came after. "She's been trying to reach out to us," John said softly. I think she's been alone for a long time." Captain Adams took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. "That's a bold assumption, John. We can't be sure of anything yet. We need to understand who or what she really is before we make any decisions." But John wasn't listening. He felt a pull, something magnetic that urged him forward. He needed answers, not just for himself, but for the alien as well. He walked toward the center of the room, where an intricate pattern of symbols shimmered faintly on the walls, almost as if they were waiting to be noticed. The alien's eyes followed him as he approached the symbols. Something in her gaze shifted, a flicker of recognition sparking behind those glowing orbs. John turned to face the crew, his voice quiet but certain. "Look at the walls. These symbols, they're not just random designs. They're a form of communication. She's trying to tell us something through them." The crew hesitated, still unsure of what to do. But Captain Adams stepped forward, her curiosity piqued. She had spent years exploring the stars, but never had she encountered something like this. Slowly, she walked toward the symbols, squinting at the faint lights that seemed to dance across the walls. "It's a language," she muttered, her voice filled with awe. "A code, maybe. If we can decipher it, maybe we can understand what she's trying to say." John turned back to the alien. "Can you help us?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. "We want to understand you. We want to help you." The alien's gaze flickered for a moment, and then, almost as if by instinct, her hand moved toward the symbols on the wall. She traced one of them with a single finger, and the symbol began to glow brightly, pulsing in time with the soft hum of the ship. The crew watched in astonishment as the wall shifted, revealing the hidden compartment. Inside, there was a small, glowing orb, much like the one embedded in the alien's chest. John stepped forward, but the alien stopped him with a simple gesture. She placed her hand over the orb and then looked at the crew, her eyes filled with a quiet plea. "You want us to take it?" John asked, his voice barely a whisper. The alien nodded, slowly, as if to confirm that this was the key. The room fell into a tense silence as John reached for the orb. As soon as his fingers touched it, a wave of energy surged through his body, unlike anything he had ever felt before. He gasped, feeling the weight of an entire history pressing down on him. Flashes of images flooded his mind, worlds in flames, a great war between civilizations, and a race of beings who had once been mighty but were now scattered and broken. The alien before them wasn't just a survivor. She was the last of her kind, the final hope of an ancient species that had once ruled the stars. The visions were overwhelming, and John staggered back, clutching the orb in his hand. His breath came in short gasps as he tried to process the onslaught of information. The alien took a step closer to him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder as though offering comfort. Through the connection, John felt her emotions, sorrow, loss, but also a deep sense of hope. This was not the story of a monster, but of a fallen race, one that had been destroyed by a war they never wanted. John turned to face the crew, his voice shaking with the weight of what he had just seen. "She's not dangerous. She's the last of her kind. Her people were destroyed, and she's been alone for centuries. She came to us for help, not to fight." Captain Adams's eyes widened as she processed what John had just revealed. "You're saying, this alien, she's not a threat?" John shook his head. "No, Captain. She's trying to rebuild. She's looking for allies, for understanding. She's been misunderstood for so long." The crew stared in stunned silence, the weight of the truth slowly sinking in. The monster they had feared was, in reality, a survivor, a lone soul caught in the wreckage of a war she had never wanted. The alien, sensing their acceptance, stepped forward again, her glowing eyes softening as she gazed at the crew. There was no more fear in her, and perhaps, just perhaps, there would be no more fear in them. But the journey ahead was far from over. Trust had to be earned, and the crew would have to make difficult choices. But for the first time, the possibility of a true understanding between humans and aliens seemed real. The struggle for understanding. The air inside the alien ship was heavy with the realization that everything had changed. What had once seemed like a monster to the crew, a dangerous threat from the depths of space, was now understood to be something entirely different. The alien whom they had feared was not just a survivor, but a beacon of lost hope, a being desperate for understanding and connection. But despite the revelations, a deeper, more uncomfortable truth began to settle in. Not everyone on the crew was ready to accept this new reality. Captain Adams, her face a mixture of determination and hesitation, stood in the center of the room, her arms crossed as she weighed the situation. "We can't just ignore the risk," she said, her voice firm but tired. "I've spent years on missions like this, trusting the unknown. It's never been this simple." John, still holding the glowing orb, turned toward her. "Captain, she's not a threat. I've seen it. I've felt it. You can't ignore what's right in front of us." Adams shook her head. "You're not seeing the full picture. What if her people aren't the only ones out there? What if there's something else waiting for us? We don't know who or what she really is beyond this moment. There's a bigger picture we haven't even begun to see." The alien stood at the edge of the room, silent and still, her glowing eyes fixed on the crew. She had understood the growing tension, the hesitation that gripped the humans who had once seen her as a threat. She had hoped so desperately that she could change their hearts, that they would recognize her as something more than a monster. But the mistrust in the room was palpable. "Captain, you're asking us to go back to a place of fear," John said, his voice filled with a quiet frustration. "You saw what I saw. Her story, her pain. She's not a weapon. She's not a threat. She's a survivor." Adams turned toward the rest of the crew, who had been quiet up until now. They were uneasy, unsure whether to follow John's lead or listen to the captain's caution. Lieutenant James was the first to speak. "I don't know, John. I can't just forget everything we've been taught. We've been told that aliens are unpredictable. How do we know she won't change on us? That the others like her won't come looking for us?" The doubt in his voice echoed through the room, and the crew seemed divided. The uncertainty was growing, and each side was digging their heels in deeper. John felt the weight of their fear, real, raw, and filled with doubt. He couldn't blame them. They had all been raised to fear the unknown, but he couldn't stay silent either. "Fear will destroy us," John said, stepping forward with conviction. "We'll never make progress if we keep running from the unknown. We need to trust, to understand, or we're no better than the species who destroyed her world." Adams opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by a soft, melodic hum, the same sound the alien had made earlier. The crew fell silent, turning their attention back to her. The alien stepped forward, her body language almost pleading, and for the first time, John could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the desire for connection. It was clear now. She wasn't here to conquer. She was here to heal. John moved closer to the alien, the orb still glowing in his hands, but before he could speak, the alien reached out and gently placed her hand on his chest. There was no violence in her movement, no anger, just a quiet, desperate plea for understanding. She looked at the rest of the crew, and for the first time since they had boarded the ship, a soft, almost imperceptible smile graced her face. It wasn't an expression of malice, but of an invitation, a sign that, despite everything, there was hope. But still, the crew hesitated. The mistrust and fear that had been ingrained in them for so long could not be dismissed so easily. Adam's face hardened, and she finally spoke, her voice quiet but filled with resolve. "We need to be sure. We can't rush into this. Not without more information. She's shown us she's not a threat, but we need to understand who else might be out there. Her people, they were destroyed. What if the others are still out there? We can't make decisions based on emotions alone." John's heart sank as he realized what the captain was saying. She wasn't just talking about the alien in front of them. She was talking about the consequences of their actions. Would humanity risk everything for a chance to trust this lone survivor, knowing that there might be more powerful, dangerous beings lurking in the shadows? Was the crew willing to accept the unknown fully, to embrace a future that might come with unimaginable risks? The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. The crew was torn, pulled in different directions. Each of them had their own doubts, their own fears. Even John, despite his belief, couldn't ignore the magnitude of what they were facing. But then, As if sensing the growing conflict, the alien stepped back. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The gesture was enough. She had done all she could to show them the truth. Now, it was up to the humans to decide what to do with it. John looked at her, then at the crew, and he knew that this moment would define everything. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and unknowns, but one thing was clear. They had crossed a threshold. And now, it was no longer just about survival. It was about understanding. The turning point. The room was thick with tension as the crew stood divided. The choice before them weighed heavily on every individual. Embrace the unknown and forge an alliance with the alien, or return to the safety of their established beliefs, rejecting the chance to build something new. The alien, standing motionless at the center of the room, seemed to sense the growing uncertainty. Her eyes, once filled with hope, now betrayed a deep sadness, one that spoke of centuries of isolation, of desperate longing for a connection that might never come. Captain Adams, her jaw set with determination, paced slowly around the room, her thoughts racing. The safety of her crew was her responsibility, but the truth was undeniable. This moment, this alien encounter, could change humanity's future forever. The stakes were far greater than any mission they had ever undertaken. "We can't stay here forever," Adams said finally, her voice low but filled with a new resolve. She turned to face the crew, her eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "We're at a crossroads. We can turn our backs and walk away, but that would mean turning away from what we could become, what humanity could become. Or we can face the unknown together and find a way to make this work." John's gaze never left the alien, who stood motionless, seemingly waiting for an answer. The hum of the ship, the same eerie resonance they had heard since the beginning, filled the silence between them. The alien was no longer the unknown threat they had imagined. She was more than that. She was the key to something much greater. "Captain, she's not just a survivor of a lost war," John said, his voice firm yet calm. "She's part of a larger story, one that could reshape everything we know about the universe. We've seen the truth. We've felt it. But we can't move forward if we don't take the first step." Adams's eyes softened. She had seen the change in John since they first encountered the alien. He had stepped forward when everyone else had stepped back. He had trusted in the unknown, while others clung to the fear that had kept them safe for so long. But then the unexpected happened. A sudden, sharp sound pierced the stillness. A high-pitched signal, louder than anything they had heard before. It came from the alien ship, reverberating through the walls, echoing in the crew's bones. The ship trembled as though reacting to the signal, and the lights flickered. "Report," Captain Adams snapped, her voice cutting through the growing panic in the room. Lieutenant James quickly checked the monitors, his face going pale. It's a distress signal. But it's not from the alien ship. It's coming from outside, an unknown source. It's too strong to ignore. Something's approaching fast." John felt a chill run down his spine. He looked at the alien, who now stood more alert, her eyes flickering with what seemed like a mix of fear and urgency. "This isn't just about us anymore," John muttered under his breath. "They're coming." The crew rushed to the control room, their hearts pounding. On the screen, a cluster of unfamiliar ships appeared, rapidly approaching the alien vessel's location. The ships were large, ominous, and their markings were unlike anything the crew had ever seen. "We've got company," Captain Adams said, her voice grim. The alien stepped forward, moving toward the crew, her hand outstretched. She spoke then, for the first time since their arrival, her voice low, alien, but somehow still full of emotion. The crew couldn't understand her language, but the tone was unmistakable. Desperation. The alien didn't need to speak a language the crew understood. The message was clear. The danger wasn't from her. It was from the approaching fleet. She had been trying to warn them all along. John looked at the captain. "They're not coming for us. They're coming for her. These are the ones who destroyed her people." The realization hit like a wave crashing against the shore. The alien wasn't alone. She had been hiding from her enemies all this time, alone and vulnerable. Her people hadn't just been wiped out. They had been hunted. And now, after all this time, her pursuers were closing in. "We need to act," Captain Adams said sharply, a new fire in her eyes. "Get to the weapons bay. We're not just going to sit here and wait to be attacked. We're going to fight." The crew sprang into action, preparing for what was to come. But in the midst of the chaos, John turned back to the alien. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was also something else, something that could not be denied. She had trusted them to be her allies, to protect her when no one else would. And now, as the enemy closed in, it was clear that this wasn't just about saving her. It was about saving humanity itself. John approached her, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "We'll help you," he promised, "but you have to trust us now." The alien hesitated for only a moment before nodding, her eyes locking with his. In that single, quiet gesture, the last barrier between them fell away. Trust had been established. The crew no longer viewed her as a monster. They saw her as a sister in arms. As the fleet drew nearer, the tension in the air thickened. The ship was ready for battle, but so much was still unknown. Would the crew be able to defend themselves? Could they protect the alien and prevent her enemies from finishing what they had started? And would this be the moment that defined humanity's future in the galaxy? A new beginning. The sound of the approaching fleet grew louder, a constant hum in the background as the crew hurried to prepare for what was to come. Tension gripped the Odyssey as everyone moved with purpose. No more hesitation, no more fear. They had made their choice. They would stand together, human and alien, to face whatever was about to break through the dark void of space. John stood at the bridge, his eyes fixed on the rapidly approaching enemy ships, trying to steady his breath. The alien stood beside him, her presence both calm and unyielding, her alien form somehow giving him strength in this moment of uncertainty. He had come to understand her. She was more than just a survivor. She was a warrior, too, fighting not just for herself, but for everything she had lost. And now, she was fighting with them. The crew was ready. They had prepared the ship's defenses, activated the weapon systems, and locked down every vulnerable entry point. Adams stood at the helm, her face resolute, giving orders with the precision of a seasoned captain. Her crew moved quickly, efficiently. This wasn't their first battle, but the stakes had never been this high. "Enemy fleet on our radar, Captain," Lieutenant James called out, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and determination. "They're within range. They're not stopping. We're their target." Captain Adams glanced at John, who nodded, understanding her unspoken question. The aliens' enemies were here, and they weren't going to back down. The time for negotiation, for understanding, had passed. It was now a battle for survival, not just for the Odyssey, but for everything they had come to believe in. "I know what we need to do," John said quietly, turning to the alien, who nodded in return. She had been through worse. She had lost everything before. But now, for the first time in centuries, she wasn't alone. The enemy fleet loomed ahead, their warships massive, their weapons primed. The alien's eyes burned with determination, and she stepped forward, her form glowing in the dim light of the bridge. The crew watched her with a mix of awe and apprehension. They had no idea what she was about to do, but they trusted her. With a single movement, the alien raised her hand, and the ship's systems hummed to life, aligning with her presence. It was clear now. She wasn't just any alien. She was a part of the ship itself. She had power, ancient power, and she was willing to use it. "Activate the shields," Captain Adams ordered, but there was no need. The alien's influence spread like a wave across the Odyssey, wrapping the ship in a protective barrier, glowing with an energy that hadn't been seen in millennia. The shields pulsed with a light so bright it almost hurt to look at. The enemy ships paused, their movements slowing as if caught off guard by the sudden surge of power. For a brief moment, The enemy fleet hesitated, unsure of what to make of this sudden show of strength. It was enough of a distraction for the crew to fire their first strike. Energy blasts shot out from the Odyssey, slamming into the nearest warship, but the enemy retaliated quickly, their ship's weapons blazing with fury. The battle was underway. John and the alien stood side by side, watching as the crew fought with everything they had. Every shot, every maneuver was a testament to their determination. The Odyssey wasn't just a spaceship anymore. It was a symbol of defiance. And the alien, the last of her kind, wasn't just a survivor. She was humanity's ally, their partner in this fight for the future. "Captain, we're taking heavy fire," James shouted, his hands moving furiously over the control panel. Shields holding, but just barely. Adams gritted her teeth, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Hold on, everyone. We can't let up. We need to finish this." The battle raged on, the ship rocking with each impact. The crew fought with everything they had, knowing that their survival depended not only on their technology, but on the trust they had placed in each other, and in the alien who had shown them what true courage looked like. Then, just as hope seemed to fade, the alien raised her hand once more. The entire ship hummed in unison, and with a surge of energy, the Odyssey launched forward, piercing through the enemy lines with a speed and force no one had expected. In that instant, the enemy ships were thrown off balance. The tides of war were turning. The alien had become the key to their victory. Her powers, combined with the crew's bravery, had created an unbreakable force. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last of the enemy ships were defeated. The Odyssey had emerged victorious, its systems damaged but intact. The crew, exhausted but triumphant, stood together, the alien among them, no longer a monster, but a hero. As the dust settled, Captain Adams turned to face the alien, a deep respect in her eyes. "We did it," she said, her voice quiet but full of emotion. "We survived, together." The alien's glowing eyes softened, and for the first time, she smiled, a small, fleeting smile filled with gratitude. In that moment, it was clear. They had become something more than just allies. They had become a family. John stood beside her, looking out at the stars. "This is just the beginning," he said. "The universe is full of possibilities now, and we're ready for them." As the Odyssey drifted through space, the crew looked toward the future, no longer afraid of the unknown, but eager to explore it. Together, they had proven that humanity could overcome its greatest fears, that they could rise above the boundaries of their world, and that even in the face of unimaginable odds, they could find a way to succeed. The alien, once seen as a monstrous threat, was now a part of their story. And with that, a new chapter began, not just for humanity, but for the entire galaxy.